All right, what's up? What's up? We recorded yesterday, and there were a lot of things that didn't really come to light, or you didn't realize that need to be said. So now it's time to say them. Just let's just start from the beginning. Take your time, and we got your back.
Yeah, so I just really want to, tell my story from the childhood on. I think it's important to talk about what you went through as a child, especially if someone else experienced that. Maybe they can relate and maybe I don't know. I just think it's important to share my story. So, starting at my childhood, I had a very normal childhood up until the age of like 6, 7. Parents were together, we went to church, all that good stuff. My older brother was my best friend, still is my best friend. My other best friend, her name was Shayla. She and I were inseparable. We always did everything together. And so it didn't strike me as odd when her dad would call my house asking for my mom. I thought, I'm, 6, 7 years old. I didn't think anything of it. But it came later on that they actually had been having an affair since I was 2 years old. And I remember coming home from school one day and my mom was packing up the house. And so, I asked her, what's going on? Are we moving? Because we had moved a few times. My dad worked in corrections, and that moved him sometimes. So she told me, no, we're not moving. And so I'm like, are you getting a divorce? And she said, yeah, I'm getting a divorce. I'm leaving with Daryl. And my brother hadn't even walked in the door yet, so I was the first to know. And I remember seeing my dad pull up in the driveway, and I ran to go tell him. She goes, no, don't tell him. I'm going to tell him. And that was a really, really emotional day. I remember my dad loaded my brother and I up in his truck, and we drove 2 hours to his parents' house, and we all just like sat there and cried together. And then I knew that my mom was gone. And the next few months were really, really hard. I was torn between, do I go with my mom or do I stay with my dad? I was very close to both parents, but a little girl, they usually want to be with their mom. And I knew it hurt my dad, but I ended up moving and going and living with my dad, or excuse me, with my mom. And I had two older stepbrothers. And it was a hard relationship with my stepdad, with Daryl at first. I mean, I guess it always was, but we just didn't really get along. And we moved around a lot. He worked in handyman services and also pastored on the side. And so, like every 3 months, we would move. I would never be in a school for longer than a few months at a time. So I never really had roots anywhere. So I was about 10 or 11 years old when things took a really bad turn. I was standing in the kitchen, my mom was gone, and I had this like weird feeling come over me, like something wasn't like this creepy feeling. I don't know how to describe it. And I turned around and I could see his bedroom door kind of cracked open, and I could see that he was masturbating. And it was just enough to where I could see what was happening, but I didn't know what was going on. I was so young, I didn't know what masturbation was. And so I remember my mom coming home and I told her about it. And I was like, Daryl was changing with the door open. That's what I thought he was doing. I thought he was just putting lotion on himself. And I thought he was, changing with the door open. And so her response was, well, I'll talk to him about it. He's not going to do that again. And then it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again. And eventually it got to where like I would be, my room was in the basement, and I would be like walking to my room, and there was another door adjacent to mine, and I could see his penis sticking through the crack of the door, and he was masturbating. So he got like braver and braver. And then there was one night that I was in my room changing to get ready for school the next day. I was like trying on outfits. I was bullied in school, so I was always paranoid about what I was going to wear, if I'm going to get made fun of, that kind of thing. And I had that feeling come over me again, and I looked up in my window. You know how basements have like those windows that are high up, and I could see
Yeah.
him masturbating, watching me through the window. And I remember running upstairs. My heart was racing. I couldn't breathe. I was so terrified that he was going to come through the door as I ran up the stairs to go wake up my mom. And he didn't, but I came in, I turned on the light to my mom's room, and I can't even breathe. I'm like, "Mom, mom." And she was like, "What?" And I didn't even get the words out, and she was like, "Son of a B." Like she knew that he had done something. And so I told her what had happened, and then I ran downstairs to my room, and by then he was inside sitting on the recliner like nothing happened. And I got on the top bunk in my bedroom. I had bunk beds for whatever reason. And I was listening through the vent, and I could hear their conversation, and she's crying, and she's like, I don't want my daughter to grow up with a pervert. And he's like denying it. Well, I don't know what happened. I don't, she saw something, you know? And so she calls me upstairs and we sit down together and she's like, tell him what you told me, you know? And so I just kind of hung my head and I'm like, I saw you doing blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I told you I would put curtains up on your window if you wanted me to. And I said, well, I didn't know that someone was going to be watching me get dressed. And so that was kind of the end of that conversation. And I like went to school the next day and I was, you know, pretty tore up. And my mom came to me the next day and was like, I remember her saying like, I could split hell wide open right now, like with the thoughts that she has. And she's like, but we're going to get through it. I believe the Lord's going to bring healing and reconciliation, restoration, you know, all these things. And so I just had to let it go. And it didn't stop there. It kept happening.
How often, when you say it, like, just so we'll know,
I
like
honestly
every couple
don't,
weeks or like
probably
once
every
a
couple
week?
of weeks. I think after that, there was a pretty good break, but then it would start happening again. We moved to a different house. And then again, he got braver. He wouldn't just expose his private parts. It was like, I would walk past his bedroom door, the bedroom door would be wide open and he would just be standing there fully naked, just like watching me, you know? And I would just get scared and I would tell my mom and nothing would happen. And then he did it when I had a friend over and I pulled my friend aside. I'm like, do you know what he was just doing? You know, so he just kept getting braver. And then I remember going out of town with my mom and we were in this hotel room and my mom was asleep and I looked up in the mirror and I could see him standing in front of the mirror masturbating watching me. And I woke up my mom. I'm like, you know what he was just doing? And like I don't even remember the conversation. It was probably pointless. But we actually went to a church the next day and he got prayer for it. And they like prayed over us. And that was it. It was like, that's the end of that discussion. Like, we don't care. So kept getting worse. I remember walking home from school one day and I could see him in the window. Like he was like watching for me, right? And he looks through the window and he sees me coming. So then he runs to his room and gets ready. And I walk in the house and he's standing there doing his thing in his bedroom. And
The door
at that,
wide open?
wide open. And so this time, I like said something. I was like, you nasty, blah, 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 blah. And I left and I ran away from home. And I was gone all day long. And I remember hiding in a field because I knew my mom was out looking for me and I saw her driving around. And I ended up going to a friend's house. I told the parents what was happening to me and they're like, you can just stay here. And I asked her that night if I could call my mom. And so I called her and she's like, you know, basically cussing me out like this is BS that you're doing this. This is your fault. You know, you are the problem.
How old?
And
You were 11?
11.
11 years old.
11 years old. So when I got that response from her, you know, it really broke me. You know, all along, she had made comments to me like, you know, maybe you should change the things that you're wearing. Like it's because of how you're dressing. And she even told me that she brought this complaint to Daryl's mother, and his mother's response to her was, I think that he just looks at Tawny and she reminds him of you. And that's why, you know, just constant, like weird justifications. And so I thought I was the problem.
That is sickening. That is beyond saying, well, your 10-year-old daughter looks like you, so that's why he's pleasuring himself in front of her every chance he gets, and you're letting it happen. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And I remember like I would go to this orthodontist appointment that was like a half hour away and he would always take me. And after my appointment, he would take his shirt off and he would say, if you put lotion on my back for me, I'm going to let you drive home. We'll take back roads. And I thought that was so weird, but I really wanted to drive and I didn't know at the time what was going on, right? So I put lotion on his back and that's just sounds so creepy. And then he would let me sit in his lap and drive. And this happened many, many times. This wasn't just one time. And I would feel him like get hard and sort of like kind of almost dry hump me, you know? And I brought that complaint to my mom. I'm like, Mom, this happened. And again, she sat us all down together and she's like, Tawny said that she felt you get, and like it re-explained it. And I mean, same story, nothing happened. Nothing ever, it was just like, well, God's gonna, whatever. Um, and during those times, he would do such nice things for me. Like I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music. And I remember he'd be like, you want to go to Walmart and I'll buy you whatever CD you want. Just let me do these things that I wasn't allowed to do at the time. And I didn't know
Grooming
until
you.
years later that that was grooming. That's just classic grooming. He did all these nice things for me before an incident would take place. So back to me running away from home, I call my mom. She not hangs up on me. I hang up on her. And so then I'm like, well, it's time to tell my dad. It's time to call my dad and tell him what's going on. And so I called him, and I remember him getting upset with my brother because my brother had known that it was going on and didn't say anything. And, God bless him, it wasn't his fault. He was, he was
Yeah.
a year and a half older than me. He was only 12. Like,
He
what's a
was a kid.
12-year-old
He
going to do
probably
with that
didn't know what to
information?
do. He didn't know what to do. I mean,
Yeah, it wasn't his fault. And I wish that he didn't get any, condemnation for that, because it wasn't his fault.
mm-mm.
So my dad's reaction was pretty, it was rational. He called the police and they started an investigation. And so I wasn't allowed to go home that night. And the next morning, I wasn't even supposed to contact my mom, but I called her anyway. And she's like, listen, I'm going to leave Daryl, but I need you to do something for me because he's facing some serious charges. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the police station and you're going to write a statement saying that you made this whole thing up. And I'm like, gosh, I don't want to do that. But if she's really going to leave him, like, this is the perfect scenario, right? Like I can do
Yeah.
this. I can
Yeah.
spare him, going to prison if she's going to leave him. And so, we go down there and I'm feeling sick about the whole thing. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I remember as we sat there and they're staring at me, I looked at her and I'm like, Mom, I don't want to do this. And she just said, well, Tawny, you have to. So I went into a separate room and they gave me a piece of paper and I sat down and I'm like, I'm jealous of my stepmom or my mom's relationship with my stepdad. I just don't like him. And so I said these things about him and none of it was true. And they just verbally attacked me. They're like, you could have ruined this man's life. You are a bad kid. Like, you really need to think about your actions. Just, and I just hung my head in shame. And it was very clear after that I wasn't going to be allowed to stay with my mom. So I was scheduled to get on a plane the day after that, but I still wasn't allowed to be around my mom and stepdad. And so when we got back to the house, my mom told me, you can't stay here. You have to leave because you can't be in the same home as him.
And
Not
you're
he had to
11.
leave,
You're
but I had
11.
to leave. Yeah. And so I remember, like, I didn't know where I was going to go. And so I packed up a bag, threw on a backpack, and I remember walking out the door and Daryl stopped me as I was leaving and he was like, Tawny, and I turned around and he goes, thank you. And I remember just looking at him and shaking my head and I go, yeah, like, screw you. And then I walked away. And I walked around that town, 11 years old, for a couple hours. I remember it getting dark and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to go. And so I had a friend who was a partier at 11, 12 years old. And his parents didn't care if he had girls over or whatever. So I went to his house and told him what was going on. And he tried to sleep with me. And I, didn't let that happen. I was so traumatized by anything like that by that
Yeah.
point anyway. And so we drank. I had my first drink of alcohol, my first hit of marijuana at the age of 11 because I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to numb what I was feeling. And so I got on a plane the next day, went to my dad's house. And that summer, my mom came and spent some time with my brother and I, just the three of us. And it was really, really good to spend that time with her. And at the end of the trip, she let me know, I've thought about it and I've prayed about it and I've decided I'm going to stay with him. And I remember just breaking down and I said some nasty things to her. I'm like, I hope you die. I hate you. Like, I want nothing to do with you. Like, it messed me up pretty bad.
Yeah.
And so,
That's
sorry.
that's your mom. That's that's supposed to be the person that protects you, and that's incredible. I'm so glad that you were able to share that. Everybody's so proud of you for sharing that 100%. I know that took a lot, and that's not even all of it, I'm sure.
No, no. So after that happened, I started high school a couple years later. Well, I started high school right away, it seemed like. I don't know, we can edit that part out too. So the next few years, I went down a really dark path. I was smoking weed, selling weed, partying every weekend. I was a pretty bad kid. I had a really rough relationship with my stepmom. She was very controlling, very manipulative. She didn't treat my dad well. And my mom and her husband moved closer to where I was at in California and wanted to reopen the door to spending time and still just kind of sweep everything under the rug. And by then it'd been a couple of years and I was now 16 and I'm ready to have a relationship with my mom again because I needed that. I didn't get
Yeah.
that from my stepmom. And I remember when we would have visits, we would meet halfway and my stepdad would be the one to pick me up. And I don't know why my dad allowed that to happen. And I remember when we would be driving back, he would have his penis out. He would have his penis out and he would just be like, driving, watching me. And so it never stopped. And that would happen even when I was younger. Like he would stay up late with me and be like, "Oh, you want to play a card game?" And I would look down and his penis would be fully out of his shorts. Like he just wanted me to see him. And that would happen many, many, many times. So the pattern never stopped. It just picked up right where it left off as soon as he was back around me again. And it got to a breaking point on one of my visits. I was sitting in front of the computer and I had that same feeling come over me, the same feeling that I would have every single time it was going on. And I turned around and he was sitting on the couch and he was masturbating, watching me. I mean, same thing, masturbating, watching me. But at that point in time, he had his biological daughter living with him for the very first time. And she didn't know anything. No one knew anything except my dad and my brother and stepmom. And so I got up and I went and woke Shayla up and I said, "Listen, here's the history summed up in 5 seconds. This is what your dad has been doing. This is what he just did. Now we're going to call and get help. Do not let him come through that door." And I locked the door and he's trying to come in. He's like, "Tawny, we need to talk." And I'm like, "Get the F away from the door, mother." I'm going completely hood on this guy.
Yeah.
And I call my mom, who's working overnight at a caregiving shift. And I'm like, "Mom, this is what happened." And she called me a liar. She's like, "Tawny, just the same old story." And so I literally just hung up on her. And then I called my dad. And when I called my dad, as soon as I heard his voice, I just start sobbing. And he's like, "Mother effer." Like he knew. He's like, "Tawny, I'm on my way." And he and his wife got in the car and made the 2-hour drive to come get me. And my dad was like, "I'm bringing my pistol. If he's there, like, I'm going to shoot him." And so I guess he must have called my mom and told her because all of a sudden Daryl left. And
What a coward. What a
yeah,
cowardly
yeah,
move that was.
yeah.
Pitiful. Sorry, continue.
And so the next 24 hours were pretty intense. My parents showed up, they grabbed me and Shayla. We went to a hotel room and the next morning we had to meet with the police and I had to give my statement and we had to sit there with CPS and they like gave us teddy bears and they were like really comforting and everything. But there were really no repercussions from this. I think he got community service, honestly, because everything that had happened for all those years, I had retracted that statement. So there was really nothing legally that could be done. And so I went back home and just really, really like if I wasn't in a dark place before, I really went into a very dark place. I contemplated suicide so many times, but could never follow through with it. Started listening to really dark music, started writing really dark poetry, just looking for an outlet. And I remember my stepmom coming in the room and being like, "You really need to get over it." Like she was just not compassionate at all. And I remember getting a letter from my mom saying the same thing, we've thought about it, I've prayed about it, and I've decided I'm going to stay. And so I didn't talk to her. I didn't talk to her for a good 6 months. And then things started getting really, really bad at home. My relationship with my stepmom got really rocky. And I remember she was just doing like really weird things. Like she would go out of town a lot. Her and my dad's relationship was pretty weird. And I thought I'm going to look into this because something's not right here.
Yeah.
She's gone a lot. And where's she going? And what is she doing? And so I went through her phone records and saw this one phone number that she had called like tons of times. And I called it, and it was some guy's voicemail. And apparently, she ran to the neighbor and she's like, I think Mike knows. That's my dad's name. I think he knows because someone called him. So basically, my neighbor confessed to me, like, yeah, that you found him. That is him. She is having an affair with this guy. His name was Jingo. And so I talked to my brother about it, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna tell dad. So we tell him what we know, and they end up splitting up. She left, and when she left, my dad, he was drinking and doing prescription pills pretty heavily. And he had been doing that for many, many years. He's free from that now, thank the Lord.
Amen.
But yeah, he was in heavy in addiction. And so he left. He went to his parents' house and kind of just like left me and my brother on our own for days at a time. And so I that's when I started getting into harder drugs. I started using
You were how
crystal.
old? 16?
I was 16 at this time. So I got into a bad crowd. I had a boyfriend that was really heavy into crystal, and so I was persuaded to use. And so it was actually the very first time that I used crystal. The coming down from that was really, really rough. It's not the same as it is today. Like, you don't experience this if you use crystal today. But back then, when you're coming down, you are very angry, violent, in pain, like lashing out. And so it was the day that I was coming down off of my very first use that she came back. She just showed up back at the house. And I remember thinking, like, what is she doing here? And they're like, we're going to have a family meeting because me and your dad are getting back together. And I'm like, wow, we're going to be a family again. I'm kind of excited. But when we sit down, she's like, I have a list of rules that I want to go over with you. I don't even think she got past number one, because number one was like, you owe me X amount of dollars for my things that you stole or destroyed or whatever. Because I did, dude. Like, when she left and
Yeah,
left her
she was
crap
cheating on your
behind,
dad. I mean,
she was
you know what
cheating
I'm
on my
saying?
dad. She was cheating on my dad. And so she left stuff behind. I was like, trash that, trash that. Hey, you want like, I got rid of everything. Like, and no, that wasn't the right thing to do, but it is what it is. And I remember her saying, what happened in this family happened between me and your dad, not you, not me, you and your dad. And so I ended up just cutting her off, and I'm like, just shut up. Just shut up. I don't have to listen to anything you have to say. Like, you did this, and I don't remember what all I said, but I was pretty aggressive. And I
Yeah.
remember her looking at my dad, and she's like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. So it's either me or it's her. And my dad basically told me, like, you have to leave. And so I walked out the door, and that was probably one of the biggest heartbreaks of my life. And that led me on my path to destruction. I don't blame my dad. I know that he was heavy in addiction, and he was heavily manipulated by that woman. And I'm in a very good place with my dad today. Dad, if you're listening, I love you and I forgive you. But it sent me on a very, very dark path. I ended up daily use with crystal. I dropped out of school. I moved into a trap house that it was a meth house, a crystal house.
Yeah.
I remember a few days after that had happened, my dad called me and asked me to come to the house, and I thought he was going to ask me to move back in. I thought he was going to say I was wrong, but what he ended up saying was, "When can you have the rest of your stuff out?" And
Golly.
it just really, really messed me up. And I remember they would like have a fight, and they would break up again, and then he would ask me to come home, and I would be home for a couple days, and then we started doing crystal together, which was wild.
Yeah.
He knew that I was in it, and he knew that I could get it, and so I got it for him, and we would do drugs together. And then he'd be like, "Well, she's coming back, so you have to leave again." And this happened like 3 or 4 times before I was so deep into my drug use that I was in a full-on crystal psychosis, and I had nowhere to go. I had no one to turn to. I could not distinguish hallucination from reality. Like, that's how far into it I was. I didn't know what I had voices in my head. You could hear audible voices of people that you knew speaking, saying things, that weren't there. And it was the craziest thing ever. And I didn't know who else to call, so I called my mom. And I remember her answering the phone, and she as soon as she heard my voice, she was crying, and she was like, "I love you." I'm like, "Mom, you need to come get me because I am in a effing nightmare." And she dropped everything and was there the next day and came and packed up all my stuff and took me back with her. And I just had to make a choice that I wasn't going to remember everything that happened before. It was never really discussed. We just had to sweep it under the rug and move on. And so I was with them for a few months, and then we all packed up and moved to Washington State. And I probably lived with them there for about a month before I met who's my oldest daughter's father, and moved in with him, and just kind of moved on with life. And then that's when I got into my heavy, heavy, heavy drinking phase. After I left, like the town that I was in where I was using crystal heavily, I never used again. Not until I had 14 years sobriety off of hard drugs. Just replaced it with alcohol, like I was saying before. So yeah, that's the pretty much summary of my childhood and what all I went through. And it's how many years later, and she's still with him. And I just see the cycle continuing. I noticed things happening with my oldest daughter that I spoke up about, and I was like, Mom, I promise you I will go to prison. I will go to prison if something happens to my daughter.
Yeah.
And when I got into my heavy drug use in my 30s, I lost custody of my oldest daughter. And so she went to go live with her dad. I think that was a blessing in disguise because I think something would have ended up happening to her.
Kept her away from him. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep. But, now I've got a 5-year-old little girl, and I just notice patterns with her now. During my time of incarceration and active addiction, I wasn't around, which isn't, the biggest regret of my life. I ultimately chose drugs over my children, and they took full advantage of that. And they sued me for custody ultimately. They had me served with papers, and I want to be clear, I never tried to have them with me when I was in my active addiction. I knew that I was not in a good place and that they were safe with my mom, maybe not necessarily with her, but where else was I going to take them? Their dads left. Their dads
Didn't
have
have
never seen them.
you did.
Like, yeah. And so it's just a messed up situation all the way around. And so when I left them at their house, thinking I just got to get it together, I'll get them back, but you're in active addiction, so it's not just a matter of stopping. Like, I needed so much intervention. And I remember getting served with papers, and conveniently Daryl was the one that wrote everything on the court documents, and he pulled out every possible thing he could say about me. Like, she's using heroin, she's living in a drug house, she's stealing things. Yeah, he pulled out every negative thing that he could say about me in my active addiction. He put on court documents and made sure that I would not get custody of my kids. I don't even think I didn't show up to the court session because I was like, I don't have a fighting chance here. Like, he's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so they got custody of my kids. And I remember it was a pretty big fight with my parents. I was like, how dare you? How do you think, like, you couldn't keep me safe from him, but you can keep them safe now? Like, how is this any different? And I just felt like he would always dangle her in front of me, when I would come to the house to see them, and it was like he'd be holding her and just kind of looking at me like with a smug look on his face. And
Knowing
so
exactly what he's doing.
yeah, yeah. And so obviously I did get the help I needed, and I'm going on 3 years in recovery. Thank you, Jesus. And I do
Amen.
have my kids back, but there were things happening. I had found out that, like, during my incarceration, he was actually sleeping in her bedroom, like sleeping in another twin bed, like in her bedroom with her. And it
Oh,
would have continued going on had my brother not stepped in and said, "This isn't right. This is not going to happen. He is not going to sleep in her room." Like, what is
what
that?
what did your mom? He just told your mom like, "Hey, I'm gonna sleep in her room. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow." Is that how that went?
I have no idea. Like, I know there were issues, like, because she snores at night, but like, then sleep on the couch or
Yeah,
find
man.
alternate methods to ease that. But why are you sleeping in her bedroom? And so that came to an end. But still, there was always this obsession with her. And she wasn't the only child. There's a little boy too that he has no relationship with. It's all about her. And so it was just weird. And um I think that it was definitely a blessing that I met Robbie and moved clear across the country.
Yeah.
But even after that, like, he's we went back to Spokane for Christmas, and he like gave her for Christmas all these framed pictures of him and her together as a gift. Not her and Britain, just her and him. And not one, it was like four or five, because he still wants to have a hold on her. And then I'm on the phone with my mom, and he gets on there and he's like, I just spent $500 on these walkie-talkies that will connect nationwide no matter where you're at. So I need you to plug that in and keep it charged so that I can talk to the kids. The kids. He doesn't want to talk to
Yeah.
Britt. He wants to talk to her.
Your daughter only.
And I
That right there is
Yeah. And I told my mom, I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this. Why are you allowing this? And it just got ignored. It was like, well, I know it's kind of weird, but they'll be there next week. So they show up. And I think I let one conversation happen before I was like, screw this. I'm not doing this.
yeah.
It was like last week
Goodness
that this
gracious.
happened. And I ended up throwing it in a FedEx package and shipped it back. I'm like, I'm not doing this.
No, that's not. I'm so glad. My wife, we're so glad that you've realized this and that you've had this blood and breakthrough is what it's called. You've had a breakthrough and you said yourself, I don't even like saying the word, but your mom, like brainwashed. I was thinking it. Her mom, I was telling my wife, like, I don't want to sound weird or whatever, but I think her mom's got her brainwashed. You know what I'm saying? My wife's like, yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. And sure enough, I said, well, we're going to pray on it. We're going to just keep talking about it, keep getting her to talk about it, and then she's going to realize. And then, sure enough, you've realized. You've spoken with your brother now. Y'all have had great conversations. Like nobody knew though. That's something else, right? So nobody in the family knew.
Well, my brother knew what was going on, but they told all of the family that I had walked in on them having sex. And that was the issue all these years. So I don't think
30
anyone, yeah, I don't think anyone actually knows what really happened.
Yeah, so he needs to, as far as your dog, and I know you know this now, in my opinion, all forms of communication snip because she's going to have to. I mean, we can pray on it. They can, oh, God's going to forget. No, that's not, you can't use God to try to cover up what's going on. There's absolutely no excuse whatsoever. As a parent, any parent on this listening to this, any person listening to this is going to go, oh, no, 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 no. And don't think it's your fault either, Tony, because I mean, it's not your fault. Like, you were literally like brainwashed for 30 years. But now I'm so thankful that you've woken up and that this is what happened. And trying to send her a radio to still talk to her, pictures and picture frames to try to, like, hi, Tony, look what I'm doing. It's like who do you think you are, dude?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk bad about your mother because I lost my mother. I was really close to my mom, and I believe in respecting people and all. But something's going to have to give like today, right now, because they don't need to even have contact at all with any of y'all. Y'all are so much better than that, so much better. And anybody listening will agree, anybody except for probably those two. And I really hope they can open their eyes. I hope your mom can open her eyes and see, oh my goodness, I've made a mistake for 30 years and go, you know what? Get out. I'm done with you. Never speak to him again and try to rebuild her relationship with you if that's even possible. You know what I mean? Like that would be the only thing. And even at that point, I mean, it's going to be very, very, very hard because you didn't do anything at all wrong whatsoever, ever. So you have to remember that. You know what I mean? Like this is a very serious thing that has to stop right now. So
Yeah. Yeah. And no, it's hard. It's hard to talk about all these things, and I do love my mom and I want a relationship with her, but it's like where do I draw that line? How do I have a relationship with her when she's still with him?
Exactly.
And
You
it's just been
can't.
excused and brushed under the rug. And, my brother and I were talking about it, and it's like she doesn't want to reopen the wound. Well, the wound's never been healed because we've never talked
No.
about it.
It's
And, my brother needs healing, I need healing, but it's just like this festering thing. And I don't know how to move forward. I know it's going to take the Lord to heal hearts and to open eyes. And I pray that that happens, but they have to be willing.
yes.
And even let's say that does happen. Why do I have to continue to expose myself and my children to this person that did these things for so many years? I
Yeah,
can forgive
you
him and I
can't.
can let all that go, but I shouldn't have to continue to be around that.
No,
It's just
he doesn't need to have any contact whatsoever. He doesn't deserve any contact because had you not left when you were 11, she told you to write the fake statement so he wouldn't get in trouble. Oh, I promise I'm going to leave then. So you do that. Oh, but no, I'm not leaving, but you got to go though. At 11 years old, as a parent myself, like I'm shaking. There's absolutely no excuse, no way possible you can do that. And had that not happened, though, it would have gotten worse. He would have
Mhm.
wound up coming in the room, closing the door, and you wouldn't have left until a lot of physical things happened that
Yeah.
you didn't want to happen. And that would have for sure 1000% happened. And that is just, it's sickening. It is so horrible that you went through this. It hurts my heart. We were talking earlier, me and Tori were. All these years, like nobody believed you or nobody knew in your family. So they probably said these things and thought these things. And then you made a lot of mistakes and stuff. So they just took that and just ran it. Well, yeah, look, see, she's da, 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 when you were messing up. Goodness gracious. That's a lot. That is a lot. That's very, 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 I can't say enough. So proud of you for coming forward, for saying this, for getting
Thank you.
everything out, because we recorded and you were still nervous about, you didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings or cause any
Yeah.
problems. After speaking with some people and praying on it, it's like, you know what? No, I don't owe anybody anything.
It
You
can't
don't.
be dealt with until it comes to the light.
That's right.
And
Amen.
so, like, this is what I had to do. And I'm not trying to hurt anyone, but like, this is my story. And I can't just tell half of it. I've got to tell the whole thing.
That's
So
right.
I hope it helps somebody to know you're not alone if you've gone through this. And there really is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. So what do you
There,
recommend if somebody is going through this even now and somebody watching or they don't, what's your advice? Speak up right then, like make
yeah,
sure you
yeah,
speak up and tell everybody you know. Would that be the best advice you think?
yeah. And just don't listen to the justifications and to like, well, if you did this different, it's never your fault. You are never the one to blame. It's not anything that you have done. It's something that's happening to you. And if you don't speak up, it's going to continue, and you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be protected. And if that's not happening now, get to a place where that's going to be. Even if you got to call me, like, dude, call me, like I would
That's
put you on a
right.
plane.
That's
Like,
same here. Reach out. Yeah, reach out to us
yeah,
for real. Yes, please
like
do.
they're,
That's why we're doing this, is to help people.
yep, yep. So, and cry out to the Lord because he's your provider. He is your protection and he knows the struggle. He knows the pain. He took that on the cross and died for it so that he would always know what we would go through as humans and he would have the answer and what we need to make it through that. So, cry out to the Lord and get help. There is
That's
help.
right. You're never alone, ever, 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 ever. And you're worth it. So please don't ever think you're not. All right, Tony. So thank you so much. Thanks for sharing this. I mean, seriously. So next week, everybody, we're going to talk about, you think you heard a lot today, which we did. Oh my goodness. The cartel. You were involved with the cartel, like in deeply with the cartel and made it through. So that's going to be a crazy story next week, isn't it?
It's gonna be wild. It's like straight out of Hollywood. I'm not proud. I mean, they're pretty crazy stories. So I've got a lot to say about that, and I'll definitely shed some light on how they operate and how they use American people to do their business.
Kidnap,
I
kid, all that stuff, don't they?
Yep. I mean, I was kidnapped, I was held hostage, I was shot at. I mean, there's so many stories that I'm going to tell y'all. So,
Well, that's going to be good. So tune in next Friday. Every Friday at 8 p.m., we will be dropping an episode. All right. So,
yes, and make sure you like and subscribe if you are liking this content and let us know your thoughts in the comments.
yes, definitely do.
Thank you guys for watching.